What's up, everyone? Check the calendar because it's Friday again. They let us get here, and it's time for another episode of the TheLeaf podcast. Now, this episode is going to be a little different. It's going to be more of a throwback episode to the very beginning of the channel, when I kind of used to talk more about ghosts and hauntings and demons and stuff. But if you're looking for cryptids, you don't have to look very far. There's really some high strangeness and possible cryptid activity involved in these supernatural kind of events that happen. And if this is your first time listening to the podcast, you'll know by the fact that I'm still talking that this is a little different than the other videos. This is more conversational. This is more just laid back, I guess is the better word. So the first experience that I'd like to get into was sent in by a viewer who has sent in stories before. This is from Dawn. So Dawn, as always, I hope I can do your story justice. Hi Tim, it's been a while because I thought I had sent you all the stories that had happened to friends, acquaintances, and family, but I was recently reminded of another one that I had completely forgot about, so here goes. I was recently reminded of an experience with a ghost a few years ago that I had completely forgot about. It occurred sometime in the early 2000s, around Thanksgiving time, at my now husband's aunt and uncle's place in Carlsbad, California. The story came up at last year's Thanksgiving get-together, which happened to be taking place at the original 2000s home. We've a large family, and Thanksgiving occurs every year at different houses, so last year, the circuit came back to that house. Hope that makes sense. So, the house in question is a single-story rambling ranch house surrounded by a large avocado grove. It's set back from the street at the end of a long, straight driveway, and there are a couple of outbuildings that have been turned into granny houses. I believe the whole place sits on 2 acres, and me and my husband have no knowledge of the history of the house prior to his aunt and uncles owning it. They are both deceased now, but their children still own the house. So years ago, when we would visit this house, we typically would stay a few days, and my husband's aunt would always surrender her bedroom over to us. There were other bedrooms in the house, so we assumed she did this because she had the largest bed in the place, and we were, and still are, 2 big dudes. We have no idea why she had this bedroom arrangement, but it consisted of 2 California king beds attached together with custom-made sheets and blankets. My husband didn't care, and I felt too new to the family back then to ask. Also, for those curious, her husband had his own bedroom at the other side of the house, which was just as weird of an arrangement. He slept in a recliner chair surrounded by TVs and VHS players and hundreds of videotapes. Again, I didn't ask. So to continue, sorry this is taking so long. I'm just trying for a clear reenactment. This was one of those years where the weather was still super hot in November, and we had every window open when we went to bed. So there we are, snuggling in the center of this vastness of bed. I fell asleep pretty quickly, but my husband remained awake due to his multiple sclerosis, not mixing well with the heat. At about 2 a.m., I sat up suddenly, absolutely freezing to death. I started saying, oh my God, what happened? Did the AC start working? It was supposedly to get fixed the next week. My husband just started laughing and said, you missed the ghost. She was right above you. You could have looked right up her dress. Now, some background. My husband, unlike me, is a complete atheist who does not believe in anything remotely paranormal or supernatural, which means that having MS always gives him an out, since people with that diagnosis can, at times, experience hallucinations. So if he sees something that shouldn't be there, just blame it on the MS, which drives me mad. So according to my husband, he was lying there, listening to me snore and thinking about what he was going to cook for the holiday tomorrow, when a woman suddenly appeared on his side of the bed. He said that she looked like a Pilgrim woman, with the typical white blouse and skirt and a black apron with a white bonnet. He did say that she also appeared to be wearing a tan sweaterish thing, like a housecoat. She was wringing her hands, and my husband says that she looked worried. Then she began walking toward the end of the bed, turned, walked a few steps, turned again, and began walking upstairs as if going up a flight of stairs, directly oversleeping me. He said when her head hit the ceiling, there was a bright bluish-white flash, and she was gone, waking me up and leaving a noticeable cold bedroom behind her. In the morning at breakfast with other family members, I recounted what happened to us, and even though my husband just kept laughing and laughing at the detail and variety of his hallucination, most of the rest of us chose to believe otherwise. So thank you to Dawn for sending that in. I hope I could do your story justice. And as a note about Dawn's husband being an atheist, I've realized, and this is not all atheists or anything, or even just people who don't believe, this is my anecdotal experience, that anybody that I know who was a very staunch non-believer in the paranormal of any kind always grew up somewheres that was very haunted, or they'd seen demons or cryptids or something of that variety at some point in their life, usually in those formative years. And some people, like myself, chose to explore it, to learn about it and pretty much find out anything and everything you can about it. But the flip side is that there are also a lot of people, maybe even more people, who just decide to shut it out. That if I tell myself that this didn't happen, or I can find some way to have plausible deniability that this happened, then it didn't happen. And they continue on that belief. And like I said, this is absolutely strictly on my anecdotal personal experience. Like, as an example, one girl I knew growing up, her house, the house that she had moved into, was haunted. Not only was it haunted, it had a reputation of being so haunted that weird things happen in the middle of the night when everyone is asleep. In some cases, people could see it from outside. Like, it had a reputation of being a really creepy house. But for her, she said, nope, I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in any of that. It's all BS. It's all shit. I don't want to hear about it or anything. And then I find out many years later that something did happen to her in that house. And the worst thing you can do when someone finally does come forward to say, yes, something happened, the worst thing you can do is say, oh, I told you so, I knew it, you were lying, and don't do that. Just take it at face value, thank them for telling you, for trusting you with the story, and then listen carefully to their experience. And I'm not going to give many details about it because some of them I just don't remember. It's been, 15, 16 some years that I've heard this story. But essentially what happened, so this girl's bedroom was kind of a rectangle shape. And just off of this bedroom, there was a small room that didn't have a door, but had a doorway. It was that had a vanity mirror in it. I think at one time it may have been a small walk-in closet, but it also wasn't that big, so I don't know. I was never actually in this room either, so I wouldn't be able to tell you. But yeah, how she laid it out for me was that she has this long rectangular room with a bit of a square room coming off to the side. And one night, she woke up and, similar to Dawn's story, it was cold. Very, very cold. I think she could even see her breath. I don't quite remember. But her TV was on, and it was on static. And if you remember the TVs from back then, they were all CRT TVs, that when you turned them on and it was on the wrong channel, it would just go to static. And how it started was through the static, because the static was very, very low, because her volume was very low. But she could hear singing underneath the static. And after sitting there for a minute, obviously creeped out, she realized that the singing wasn't coming from the TV. It was coming from that other room where her vanity mirror is. And she even told me that she, very slowly dragged her eyes along the room until it got to that doorway, and she could see that the light was on in the room that this vanity mirror was in. So she got up and slowly walked over to it, and there was a woman sitting in her chair looking in the mirror, but she had no reflection. So this girl gasps, of course you would, why wouldn't you? That's terrifying. and as she stepped back, the woman turned to look at her, and the woman had no eyes, but appeared to be crying black tears or makeup. After this, the girl screamed, and then whatever was sitting at her vanity table screamed as well. She fell backwards and passed out. When she woke up, it was still the middle of the night. She pretty much ran, crawled on all fours, and got back into her bed and just stayed there until daybreak. And ironically enough, she never ever told me that story until after she moved out of that house to go to college. And as for who owns or what happened to that house now, I could not tell you, it's been so long. But a lot of the stories that I would hear and that other people would say they heard is that on certain nights, usually like nights where there's no moon, I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but just something people noticed, that when there was no moon, they would see a woman who looked like she was crying coming down the stairs, and she was always wearing this kind of flowy dress, like a pink dress or something. It had like some flowers on it. So Dawn's story kind of put me in mind of that story that I had heard all those years ago, and I think with that one I should actually try to reach out to that person and maybe see if I'm missing anything or see if I got everything right. But I think the reason why she said that she just refused to believe in any of that was she wanted to believe that it was just a bad dream. But the next day she checked on the mirror and all of her stuff had been moved around, and there were handprints and fingerprints all over the mirror, and it had just been cleaned the day before. So you can imagine just how terrifying that would be for somebody, especially when they're just like coming into their teenage years. And in the case of Don and his husband, you know, that would be terrifying too. To be honest, the part that would freak me out the most about that, besides seeing the woman, would be to see her start walking up the stairs as if there were stairs there and disappearing into the ceiling. At that point, I would definitely leave the room and maybe go sleep somewhere else. I mean, maybe these days, if I had seen something like that, I might just try and go searching for it with my camera out so I can make a video out of it. I don't know. It would scare the shit out of me pretty much. And, as I said, I had a certain story that involved a lot of high strangeness, possible demonic cryptid activity, and this is that story. So, the person doesn't say where this was, they don't say if they're a boy or a girl. I would assume they were a boy, and you'll see why. And they say that they have lived in haunted houses for pretty much all their life, but this was one of the more terrifying experiences. So I moved out of my mom's house and in with my dad, because after my parents got divorced, I couldn't stand to be at Mom's house anymore because she wouldn't stop saying negative things about my dad. Shit was just as bad at my dad's house because of my stepmom. My mom essentially had a breakdown and went nuts and spent thousands of dollars on the best lawyer she could afford. Dad and stepmom had to move out of my stepmom's nice large house and into this rental home. I always liked her house the best. I never saw anything, and it always felt at peace. I learned, later on, that she had it blessed years before. My sister even told me years later that a friend's grandfather, who was a very cruel man, died around the same time that we met my stepmom and haunted my sister. He knew that she could see him and would follow her and harass her. He couldn't step inside the blessed home. He would glare at her from the outside. I don't really know what happened after my stepmom lost the house. My sister said that whatever it was or he was stopped bothering her shortly after. I move into the small rental home with my dad and my stepmom. My first night there, something comes. I see a creature crawl and loom over my chest. It's about 5 feet tall. It had a pitch black body, but it still stood out in the dark room. It had a friend clinging to the ceiling with a hunched back and legs and arms splayed like a gecko. It looked totally emaciated. It had an exoskeleton instead of skin. It looked charred, with crumbling lumps like it had been burned. 4 spikes were in a circle on its head like horns, It had giant shiny white or gray eyes. It had claws instead of hands, and 2 claw toes on its feet. I froze up from fear. I remembered Dad had sleep paralysis. I did an experiment to test if it's this. I flex my hand. I can move fine. I take a deep breath out. I can breathe fine. And the more I realize that I'm able to move, the more I become too terrified to move. The things both begin to make noises that kind of sound like deep, low chuckles at my fear. I do the only thing I can think of. I pray. I ask him to help me, over and over again. I go into a weird meditation state and pray until I fall asleep. This repeats every night when they come back. I'm ashamed to admit it now, but being a teenager, I masturbated in my room quite often during the daytime. I assumed they were gone because I didn't see them. I hide in my room a lot because my stepmom is emotionally abusive and will say anything to make me feel like shit. One night, the demon thing shows up and begins to make a masturbating motion toward me and laughing. It was then that I realized that they were always there, always watching me, even in the times when I couldn't see them. They were trying to tell me they watched me when I did private things in my room. Weeks pass of this. One night, I'm in the middle of praying, and suddenly I hear something new and stop. It's the loud chime of a bell that rings out as loud as possible inside my head and echoed through my skull. 2 small angels with long white gowns, long brown hair, and white wings come through the wall to my left like it wasn't even there. They both had swords. They pulled them out and began to slash, fast and vicious, at these demons. For once, I saw their big eyes grow wide with fear. The one above me raised its arm up in an attempt to protect itself and made an animal-like screech. The one on the ceiling fell to the floor and landed like a defensive cat on all fours, flinching at the sword strikes. The angels were hovering and swooping up and down, left and right, like tiny, fast-moving master swordsmen. These creatures flee out of my room and go through the wall, just like it wasn't there, away from the angels, but the angels were hot on their heels in pursuit through the wall after them. I sent a prayer to God as a thank you. I rolled over and passed out. That night I finally had a good night's sleep. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of my experiences, but they were in that house. Later on, we had to move again, because at this point, my mom just wanted revenge and wouldn't stop until my dad had wasted every cent he had through forced court cases. So if that wasn't high strangeness, then I don't know what is, especially the weird gecko thing. That would be so weird, just seeing that on the ceiling. My skin crawls just thinking about it. What do you think they were? Let me know down in the comments. And if you have stories of your own, as always, you can send them in to the email in the description below. If you would like to donate to the channel, even a one-time donation, I have a PayPal and a Patreon, also down in the description. And with that, I thank you for pulling up a stump with me. I thank you for watching, and I will see you Sunday. Have a good week and a good weekend.